A lot of times people in this space are using NLP. NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. Now, that could be used in good ways or in negative ways. NLP itself is not inherently negative. And it's kind of like saying a hammer is a tool of destruction or construction, okay? You could use a hammer to knock a wall down, or you can use a hammer to build something beautiful. That's kind of what happens when it comes to neuro-linguistic programming. And a lot of people who use mentalism and people who are magicians and performers in that way use NLP. Also, sometimes people use NLP for healing. You know, some people might do subconscious therapy where they're using NLP to program positivity into this person's mind. Now, on the other hand, someone could also use NLP to manipulate someone. They could use NLP to disarm someone. And it's very easy to learn how to do NLP. Any of us could learn how to do it online in an online course, in online videos, books available. It's accessible to everyone. Another thing would be something like The Art of Seduction, that book by Robert Greene. Now, that book really does teach people how to manipulate. And just as a couple of excerpts from that book, you know, that book's been around forever. It's a best-selling book. So many people have read it or bought it and attempted to read it, and then it just sits on their shelf forever because it's a really boring read. I had that book when I was 18, and you know what? I only got a couple pages in. However, I do know some of the basics of the book just because social awareness of the book. And so The Art of Seduction. Robert Greene talks about how seduction is a nonverbal language. And just all of you have probably experienced someone like this. If someone is being overtly seductive towards you, you're going to close up. Unless, you know, you really like them. But maybe even if you do really like them, you might close up because it's forceful. Now, the subtleties of seduction is to embody that, to make your personality seductive. Now that, once again, could be used for harm, could be used for good. I can't think of many instances that it would, unless you're like an artist performer. You know, if you're a singer, dancer, something like that, I could see using the art of seduction to enhance your art. But oftentimes the people that are using it could be, you know, politicians or, you know, spiritual gurus and spiritual teachers, because they are using the tactics that come from that book all the time. And same thing, it could be used for construction or destruction. It could be used for someone's benefit, or it could be used, you know, for artistic benefit, which is not to, you know, start with the person. Okay. So here's some of the things that we need to talk about. Oh, another thing that comes from Art of Seduction before we move on, and this is a thing that I wanted to point out about these cult leader tendencies. We're going to first go over cult leader tendencies and patterns, and then we're going to go into the models of determining whether something is a cult or not. One of the number one tactics of seduction in that book, which is also a tactic of manipulation, is to let people talk more about themselves than you talk about yourself. So now you start to learn all of the things that this person likes. You like to learn all the things that trigger this person, that they dislike, their wounds, and then you can use all of those things against them later. And that is a tactic that we see time and time again from these cult leaders. Now, okay, let's start with the characteristics of cult leaders, and these are also the ones that line up with being a sociopath. Now, I know I'm also streaming over here on TikTok. There's a lot of stuff that if you use the word sociopath, a lot of people get triggered and say, don't portray them negatively. These are the facts, okay? We're not here to tiptoe around sociopaths' feelings, people who don't even have feelings, to not warn and protect other people who are being genuine. So sorry if anyone's triggered. Log off if you don't like it. Sorry. I got banned last week for what I said on TikTok. So actually, I should chill. I got banned for days of going live on TikTok after last week's Tuesday Night Live. So here I go again. Anyway, okay. So this information is coming from Robert Hare's work on sociopaths, as well as Madeline Tobias and I'm going to probably butcher this name, Jonja Lalick. Okay, they wrote a book called Creative Hearts, Creative Minds, Freedom and Recovery from Cults and Abusive Relationships. Now, a lot of these things could happen on the personal level. So keep in mind that maybe you're not involved in a group or something like this, but there might be someone even in your personal life or a partner who's doing these same tactics to you. So the cult leader's needs always come first. Now, typically cults, there's a group and they serve the power, financial gain, emotional gain, or sexual needs of the leader. These things are always coming up. The needs of the leader always end up becoming a point of interest for the whole group. Even if that wasn't their initial interest, everyone gets steered towards that. The leaders position themselves above others. They are often charming. Pretty much. You can't start a cult unless you're charming. They also seemingly have the answers to everything. And when members of different groups get together, all different cults, like when they have these groups of people who have survived cults, they could take people from FLDS. They can take people from Children of God. They can take people from some other obscure groups. What's so interesting is that they think that the leader was so unique and so special and so one of a kind and so gifted. And then all these people from different groups get together and they're like, what? Why is our cult leaders all the same? I thought this was the most special person on earth, but we're all describing the same type of person. And the same person does the same tactics, the same thing again and again. And that's because these are certain sociopathic traits that show up in almost all cult leaders. And also, let's talk about baby cults for a second. Baby cults is what I like to call them. There's people who kind of are a cult leader in the making, but they haven't got enough followers yet, okay? You could see these tendencies in someone who maybe doesn't have a full influence, so maybe they're not using some of the higher levels. They're still using these more entry levels. And then if they get more of a following, they might graduate to something like what Scientology does, which is suppress you from your family, start to blackmail you. But someone's not going to do that on day one. So this is where I'm going to say there is also a level of baby cult. Okay? There's always superficial charm. The charm is always on a superficial level. It's never something truly in depth with these people. Cult leaders will manipulate emotions to create relationships in which they can dominate. So another thing that we see more in the spiritual space, especially that I've seen, is people manipulating members of the opposite sex, gender, whatever the hell you want to call it. You know what I mean? All right. I know I'm on TikTok here, about to get banned for that. So people will, a lot of times in these groups, maybe not have a partner, maybe be searching for a partner, or maybe be recently out of a relationship, and they really latch on to someone who puts themselves in a position of emotional manipulation. Now, it could be romantic manipulation, it could be spiritual manipulation, but these are often tactics when we see all of these different documentaries on cults, on Netflix, on HBO, time and time again. We see that they're always manipulating that relationship with someone. Now, it might be, a lot of times it's romantic. Many times when a male cult leader, and we know a lot of men have issues with power. You give them a little bit of power, even it could be a crossing guard level of power, and they want to use it to get women, you know? A lot of times what I've noticed is watching stuff with more female cults, they use sometimes manipulation. Sometimes they do use sexual allure to get people in. But a lot of times they will tap into other things like that one, The Way Down, the one that was like the Christian weight loss cult. the one that they died in the plane crash on the way to the Trump rally. Crazy ending to that documentary. But she was using people's insecurities about their bodies, about weight loss, about things like that. So finds a way to emotionally manipulate and get these people closer. Okay. We're moving quickly here because there's so much to get through. Grandiose sense of self. These are sociopathic tendencies, but also cult leader tendencies, and a huge sense of entitlement. They crave attention and adoration, even though they say that they don't, and they portray themselves as not wanting adoration. But it's very obvious if you can kind of pull up and get some air from the situation, you realize how much they actually are obsessed with the adoration. They present themselves as geniuses. They present themselves as being enlightened, and they usually will present themselves as leading humankind towards a particular direction. However, they are often empty inside. These people who really do pretend that they are trying to save humanity, they say that they really show a lot of compassionate qualities on the surface with the superficial charm. But as you get closer, it doesn't get warmer. It doesn't get more compassionate. Actually, under that, it does have this appearance of being empty, but mostly only the inner circle could even get that close to see it. They're often pathological liars, and they lie as easily as they can breathe. When confronted with their lies, they simply change the story. They don't show guilt or embarrassment. Now, this is an important quality because sometimes when people get caught in a lie, when normal people get caught in a lie, they usually are like embarrassed. It's an embarrassing thing, right? So if someone like catches you doing something that's not true or calls you out on something that's not true, most normal people with a normal conscience are going to say something along the lines of like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean to. Oh, this is so embarrassing. I didn't mean to lie to you. Now, these cult leaders don't miss a step. They just fill in with another lie and another lie and another lie and another lie. Now, you also might see this in personal relationships. Like I said, any of these things could show up in personal relationships one-on-one as well. You catch a partner lying and they just add the other lies instead of saying like, oh shit, I'm so sorry. That's a red flag. Now, I'm not saying that person's a sociopath, but that's a red flag that something is really wrong. There's something called pseudologica fantastica. You know, what a word, right? It's an extension of pathological lying. And this is where cult leaders not only create lies, they create complex belief systems or ideas or about their own powers or their own abilities or their own history or about their own story. And they usually will get caught up in this themselves. They might believe it themselves. We don't know. Do they believe it themselves? But this is like an extension. It's not just regular pathological lying. This is really like world building pathological lying. If you guys saw that FLDS documentary on Netflix, that's a perfect example of it, is how he is like the extension of the prophet. The prophet only channels through him. And now he starts creating all of these rules and these things and all this stuff because of what the prophet is telling him. Now, these people are not original thinkers. Cult leaders are very rarely original thinkers. This is another common thread with them. Even though they appear to have original thoughts to their followers, what they actually do is they gather ideas from a bunch of other people. They package it all together. So a lot of times they either are great researchers or they're really good at picking out these people who are individuals, talking to them, getting all of their information, and then repackaging it as if it came from some higher source or from some special place that you don't have access to. You can't go there. You're not a part of this. So only I know this information. But in reality, a lot of people along the way know that they're the ones who gave them that information or channeled that or this or that. Maybe there was, and that's the thing is, we're talking about this stuff, but this is coming from someone who, I believe in channelers, I believe in aliens, I believe in the spiritual thoughts. What we're talking about is these kind of narcissistic people, sociopathic people, these cult leaders who position themselves into these communities, which are based on beliefs that people resonate with, and then manipulating and positioning themselves into a place of power, creating lies about themselves and their own history and their own abilities, and then using that for power, emotional manipulation, adoration, financial gain, and usually their sexual needs will come into it. They don't usually do that with everyone. They slowly pick through and do the sexual needs here and there because they don't do it to every single member. I've watched all these documentaries on cults, Okay. They usually have a lack of remorse and a lack of guilt, but usually you're not going to see that because they're going to be covering up with the other lies. So it might be hard if you're in the mix of it to see that this person doesn't really have remorse.